So yeah, my name is Jeff. I'm a quantitative analyst here at Atlassian. So I'm on the demand generation team, and our primary responsibilities are for advertising and campaigns. So our job is to bring new customers to the website, and hopefully they're the right audience and they're the people that want to buy our product. So I'll start off a little bit about Atlassian. We sell software for software teams, right? Most of you guys may have heard of Jira. That's our flagship product. We sell software to big companies, Fortune 500 companies, and small startups. So we really see a lot of variety in the people that are buying our product. The strategy that we use is just to get the product out there, right? We want to make it really easy for people to come, download the product, evaluate it. We have a starter license program where you can pay $10 and get a license for 10 users forever. And really, this is great for getting the product out there, letting it sell itself. But this is raises hell when you try to figure out what's actually going on, right? Because you have all kinds of people coming and evaluating. You're not really sure what they're doing, and they may show up 2 years later and start buying products, right? So with that, we have this very metrics-driven culture. We have founders that really want to know where every dollar we spend is going. But it's really difficult to figure that out because we're so open with the way we pass our products out, right? So the problem I'm going to talk about today is for every dollar that we spend in online advertising, how much do we get back, right? And this is a question that anyone who runs advertising should be able to answer immediately, right? You're spending a lot of the company's money. What are you doing with it? So I know this is maybe I'm not quite sure what the makeup of this group is, so I'm going to talk a little bit about basic kind of marketing thinking. The first thing is it's all about the funnel, right? So marketers like to think that customers are going to move through this funnel. At the very top, we have a lot of people who are maybe aware of your product, aware of your brand, but they're not necessarily looking for something right away. A little bit lower down, we have people who are looking for an issue tracker, perhaps in our case. But they're going to evaluate a bunch of products, so we want to try to get in their mind and try to get them to try our product, right? And then at the very bottom, you have people who are wanting to buy immediately, right? And we want to get those people to our shopping cart and through it as quickly as possible, right? We want to make that very painless process. So for people in the different segments of this funnel, we have different types of advertisements, right? So let's go through some of those. This first one is a banner ad. This is probably what we're most familiar with. This is on Stack Overflow. So this is really targeting right at the top of the funnel. We're trying to get people aware about the product. We don't really expect you to click on a banner ad, right? But maybe it's nice. You can get the name Jira in your head, and next time you're thinking about maybe looking for an issue tracker, think about this and go look for it. Next is something we call a non-brand advertisement. So this person is looking for an issue tracker. They're searching Google. And there's a lot of people here you can see who make issue trackers and are competing for that person's attention, right? These ads are a little bit more expensive because there's so many people competing. But it's a really good way for us to get high on these search rankings, right? Because it's going to be really difficult for someone to SEO and get that first spot. So we're going to pay some money to get up there and hopefully get you to click. And finally, there's what we call brand advertising. So this person's just looking for Jira, right? At this point, it's kind of interesting, why would we buy an ad for someone searching for Jira, right? And that's a question that marketers tend to debate, is this a good use of money? But these ads are cheap. There's no one else really buying, so we can pay a few cents to put this ad up. Interestingly enough, people who are ready to purchase are 20% more likely to click that ad than that first search result. And you can kind of think about, why would someone do that? But maybe it's a self-filtering thing. But we know it happens. This isn't expensive for us, so we do it. So next, why do we care, right? So if we're going to make business decisions, they always say, you're going to pump up a bunch of metrics. Why do I care about these metrics, right? So we can do some pretty obvious things with ads, right? We can buy more, we can buy less. We can buy in for different keywords. We can buy in different networks. And we really want to compare how all those different things are doing. And we want to really spend efficiently, right? That's the whole point. We want to milk all we can out of our advertising dollar. So the metric we're going to look at is very simple, right? It's just cost per acquisition. The amount of money we're spending on advertising divided by the number of new customers, right? And that's how much we are paying pretty much to get a new customer. So this sounds pretty simple, right? But then the crux of the question is which sales were driven by advertising, right? And this is actually a very difficult question. So there's two, I'll kind of break this into two problems. The first is clicks, right? Like, so someone might visit this site any number of times, right? Like, how do you know, like, which one is driven by advertising, right? I mean, is it if the last click was an ad, and so then their sale is driven by advertising? Is it the first time, right? Or is it like, can we just cherry pick if there's an ad somewhere in there, then it's driven by advertising, right? This is actually like, this is how you could easily get to a very bad metric, right? If you just kind of cherry pick whatever works best for you. And interestingly enough, when I first started, we were looking heavily at Google Analytics, which is very focused on this first method, right? The final click right before you purchase is the one that they're going to count. And this made us look really great on brand advertising, right? That slide I showed before, because a lot of people like to click that ad because they're right about to buy, right? And so the management was saying, well, then why don't we just turn off all the rest of the ads, right? Because they're obviously not driving people to buy, right? The second problem is one of identity, right? So we're not Amazon, right? If you come to our site, you're not just going to go ahead and like put something in the cart and buy, right? It's like a few $1,000s worth of enterprise software, right? So a common workflow that we see is maybe someone's a manager and they hear about Jira and they come and they look at the screenshot tours, feature tours, and all these things. And they think, okay, this is a good product. I'd like to try it out, right? So they tell their sysadmin, go to the website, download, and start an evaluation, right? Install this thing, get it up and running so my team can try it. So that person, shows up out of the blue, right? Signs up, downloads, does all the stuff to start up an evaluation, right? So they try it for 30 days, they like it, they want to buy it. All of a sudden, they say, okay, I'll make a PO, send it off to accounting department. Someone in finance, right? Shows up to the website out of the blue, goes in, buys $2,000 worth of software, right? So how are you supposed to measure like whether or not the ads that manager saw and the feature tours and all the stuff that they did actually affected that whole process, right? And this is a very difficult problem. Yeah, so this is tough. But really, there's a big pot of gold at the end of this, right? Because if we know which ads are working, are convincing that manager to come to the site, right, and kickstarting that whole process, we can make a lot of money, right? We can just buy the right ads. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we kind of got to this point. I'm going to work backwards, and I'm not going to get too involved in like implementation details, but hopefully you kind of get a sense of what the whole process is. I'm also going to apologize about my diagrams because they look like they're drawn by like a 2-year-old. So let's imagine these two gray bars are just time series, right? They're just a series of activity, right? And maybe the different colored dots are different sources, right? So the green ones might be those brand ads that you saw. Maybe the pink one is like a display ad or whatever. And that star is a purchase, right? So this top person bought, this bottom person didn't buy, right? So if we have this, well, then the only thing we're really interested in is like, what is the value of one of these dots, right? Because if that green dot is really valuable and there's a lot of them, then I should just buy more of that green dot, right? If that pink dot doesn't show up very often, but it always shows up when people are buying, then I should buy more of that as well, right? That's working. So how do we do that? We chose to go a very simple route, something that we could explain to executives, and they could we could all kind of be thinking the same thing, right? So what we use are called attribution models. This is an early touch attribution model. Basically, what it does is it takes that purchase and cuts it up, and assigns a decreasing proportion of the value just based on the order of the touches, right? So these all add up to 1, and the first touch gets more value, and then it sort of decreases. We have another one called equal touch, same idea, but it just spreads the value equally. And then the inverse, a late touch. So I want to say something about this. Basically, what's nice about this is it's very easy to explain. It's sort of agnostic as to what the individual ads are. And basically, they sort of reflect what you value, right? So if we were an online retailer, maybe we would value that last touch more, right? Because I'm going to click on that and then I'm going to buy, right? It doesn't really matter the first few times, like if I was doing research, reading product reviews or whatever, maybe that doesn't matter as much to me that you do it on my site, but I really care that you come in at the end and buy it from my site, right? Because that's where I make my money. But maybe for a company that's looking to spread their brand and try to get more awareness, that early touch stuff might be more interesting to you, right? So what it really allows us to do is kind of see things in a few different perspectives. So now we can calculate cost per acquisition, right? If cost per acquisition is falling or stays flat, we're doing great. We're making our ads more efficient. We're paying less to buy a new customer. So we should keep buying ads, right? If it's staying flat, by spending more, we're getting more volume, right? So we're buying more customers for cheap. If the cost per acquisition starts going up, our ads are becoming less efficient. And this is not necessarily a bad thing all the time. So we get guidance from our financial team as to what is the most we can possibly pay to acquire a new customer, right? So what we would like to do is just buy right up into that limit and then see how much volume we can get out of that, right? And that really allows us to maximize our budget. So these are some charts that we look at in our monthly advertising retrospective meeting. And I took the axes out, so I'll kind of go through this. This big, thick green line here is our spend. That's how much we're spending on those non-brand ads. We've doubled it since December. And the top thin green line is the cost per acquisition based on the late touch model. So we know that these non-brand ads come in probably 50 or 60% of the way through the user's interactions. So it's more of a late touch thing. And as we spend more, we're going to see more of that value reflected in the late touch model. But we've been pretty successful here. We've been able to justify doubling our budget, and we know that we're paying 40% less to acquire customers. Go ahead.
If you don't mind me asking a question, then what you're saying here is, if you believe in the late touch model, like if you believe that that's the way, that's really how customers buy, then you've decreased 40%. If you don't believe in that model, if you believe that it's an early touch thing, then you've done okay.
I think. Okay, so the question is, if you believe in that late touch model, then you've done really well. But if you don't believe in it, then you're just kind of flatlining. I think that's a good point. But really what we're interested in is volume, right? Like we just want more customers. And as long as our early touch thing isn't increasing, like as long as one of the other two models isn't skyrocketing, I think we think that's okay. Go ahead.
So is the attribution model, is that a strategic decision? Basically, you're going to drive what you spend and drive your actions based on the strategic decision. It's even or upward sloping or downward sloping or however you model it.
Yeah, I think
it's a strategic decision.
Right. So the question is, this is a strategic decision. More or less, yes. I think where we get sort of into that is, what is the maximum that we're willing to pay to acquire a customer? Can we stay under?
That's an aggregate, though.
I'm sorry?
That's an aggregate, though, the spending across, because you don't necessarily know, they first saw us at Facebook, back in each of those steps. You can't tell when they saw you in each of those until afterwards, after you modify the data over time and correlate that and say, okay, well, we spent more here for this quarter and spent less here for this quarter, and that increased. That decreased our cost per customer, cost per acquisition. So you have a theory going in, your strategic theory. Over time, as you collect data, you validate it or invalidate it, and it may even vary over time. Is that the way you do it?
Yes, that's correct. So we do see the cost per acquisitions changing The way we've kind of dealt with this problem is that here we're calculating cost per evaluation. And evaluations usually happen quicker than sales. So we get less change over time, and the trends tend to stay the same. But we haven't been doing this that long, so we're just going to kind of see what happens as we do it more. Any other questions? OK, so I'm going to keep moving. So I kind of did a little magic wand wave there. This stream of user activity just kind of magically appeared, right? And I do want to talk a little bit about how we get to that point. So we use big data, right? We use Hadoop, and we take advantage of our weblogs to do all this analytics. So I'm going to go through, at a fairly high level, what we do, and maybe give some advice about things we learned along the way. The first step is you have to record your data, right? Make sure those weblogs are being recorded properly. Then you have to identify who your users are. And then you need to identify, and categorize your different referrals of people who are coming to your website. And then finally, you geek out and you make charts and graphs and really wow people in presentations and things like that. So for recording your data, what we did was we just modified our access log format to include the Google Analytics cookies. So when you visit a website, Google Analytics will put a few cookies on you. And they give you a unique identifier, and they kind of record like how many times you've been to the website and all kinds of nice information. So this is a really easy way just to kind of take advantage of that and get a session cookie that persists across multiple sessions. The second thing is you have to identify who people are. So the really easy way to do this is just log a username when they log in, right? But you can also kind of grep for certain request parameters that might suggest who someone is. For example, when someone starts an evaluation, we see a server ID come across, and we can kind of infer who that person is based on that. But that's really hard. I don't recommend doing too much of that. Next, you need to figure out what's an ad and what's not an ad, right? So an easy way, and something that we've started doing, is we just append a hash value to each one of the ad links that we put out. And that makes it very easy to kind of look it up in a database and get all the metadata that we want for that ad. But it's really common, sort of in the marketing area, to use something called UTM tags, which Google Analytics can read, and so you can parse those out as well. The difficulty with that is you just have to make sure that everyone's on the same page and using the right tags and things like that, and that gets a little hairy. So the hash value has been working out pretty well. And the last thing is, we do a lot of batch processing in Hadoop, but that's really not very interactive. So we still end up doing a ton of slicing and dicing in SQL, and it's a really useful tool for us. So I want to stop talking for a second, but you guys can read this comic. Some of you guys might have seen this one. So it's a good question, right? Like, why would we, if you're an analyst and you're very comfortable in SQL, like, why would you move into this Hadoop, Erlang key value store distributed MapReduce world, right? It seems painful, and it is painful.
Can you read it for those in the back?
Absolutely. I was wondering if I would get to curse in this presentation. So this guy's saying, how do I query the database? And this guy on the phone is saying, it's not a database, it's a key value store. And then this guy says, OK, it's not a database, but how do I query it? And this guy goes, you write a distributed MapReduce function in Erlang. And this guy goes, did you just tell me to go fuck myself? And then this guy goes, I believe I did, Bob. Which is basically, if you ever start writing MapReduce, you're going to say this to yourself probably 15 times. But there are good reasons to use Hadoop and to use HBase. The first reason is it's got great economics, right? If we wanted to process terabytes of data, we would be looking at Oracle or Teradata or some other big kind of solution. But with Hadoop, it's open source, it's free. We can really bootstrap a project for not a lot of money. And Hadoop in particular is a good platform for what we're doing because it's got MapReduce. The MapReduce functionality is really built for processing data. right? I think a few other NoSQL databases, from what I can tell, are really more about being a document store and serving websites and things like that. So Hadoop is a good option for what we're doing here. And finally, HBase is an interesting decision. I'm sure we could have done a lot of things that we wanted to do using Pig and Hive and things like that. But HBase is really nice because it gives you a primary key index, and it organizes things into tables and columns and things like that. So it's just a little bit saner to deal with than trying to deal with a bunch of files in HDFS and mess with that. So now I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a demonstration of what our HBase schema looks like and what these different tables do. So HBase is organized like SQL. It's got tables and columns, and there's a lot more to it, but basically you can think of it that way. We have one main table called the log master table, and this is where we just import all our web logs into, and we just kind of stuff them all in there. This is just in the log master table. Every row is just an entry in an access log. So this is just a heap of sort of unsorted data. Interesting thing is we hash everything in HBase, and this is a thing you should do in HBase. So it prevents hotspots, but who cares? So it's got all the standard fields you would see in a weblog, and it's also got a few extra fields that we added. It's got this session cookie that kind of persists as long as you are coming back to the website. And if you ever log in, the username's in there as well. So the next thing we need to do is solve this identity problem, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to map reduce over this table, and we're going to push the user cookie into a different table called the user identity table. And we're going to push all the identities that we've ever collected about this particular cookie. And we also collect the IP addresses and try to look up organizations through reverse DNS and all kinds of other fun tricks. But basically, the idea here is that we want to collect all the identities that you've ever shown us. So if you're using a pseudonym, or you're evaluating under your Gmail address and later purchase under your work address, we can tie those together and pump out the identity that we want to see, right? And finally, we just join these tables. We take the user cookie here, which should link to all the requests that you've ever made to our website, and we push it into a table called user data, and put your identity in there, and now all your weblog fields are sorted by timestamp, and we can just kind of extract the relevant pieces of information we want to know about you, right? So you guys should all be really creeped out now, because I'm sure Google is better at this than I am. So this is basically pretty simple. This is how our HBase schema looks, and that's about it. So in conclusion, there's a lot of value in weblogs. Like not just for monitoring, things like that. The business can really derive a lot of value from really knowing what people are doing, right? And it's not just weblogs on your marketing front page or your landing pages or things like that. This is inside your SaaS products, inside your documentation, inside your support tracking tool or whatever, right? But it's not that easy to get value out, right? But this is really opening up a lot of possibilities for us, right? Something that I didn't really talk about is retargeting, which is even creepier than all this stuff, is where we drop cookies on you, and that starts showing you ads kind of around the web, kind of anywhere around the web, right? And we can become much more targeted about that, because before we can only target people who maybe log in, but now that we kind of can infer who you are based on all these other attributes, we can start targeting you even if you're that manager that never logs in and never bought an evaluation, but maybe are driving the decision more than any of the other people in that process, right? So from an advertising perspective, this is great, and we have other teams looking into this data as well and doing stuff to improve our products and things like that. So with that, I'll kind of open up for questions.
Question. Maybe a little bit naive question, but you have to forgive me on the psychology. So, have you ever compared the results you're getting from this quantitative analysis to, let's say, the user focus groups or talking to the customers who actually buy your product? Did you ever match up? What's the correspondence? What's the efficiency you get? on measuring ROI with this as opposed to
So the question is, we've done a lot of quantitative work here, and have you ever qualitatively kind of like verified what we're seeing here? So this is actually a really interesting question. When we were kind of piloting this, we found an anecdote about this guy, which really kind of we used to convince the management team. This guy has a personal blog, and he's a big fan of Atlassian. And he, many years ago, logged into the website and bought a starter license, right, a $10 starter license, and started kind of talking about it. A few years later, through all this identity mapping thing, we see that he becomes an employee of New York Times. So he starts an evaluation there. He first starts an evaluation under his Gmail address, right? And then a few months later, he starts an evaluation under his New York Times address. So then they're evaluating a ton of products. And then a few months later, not him, he doesn't purchase, but a coworker purchases, right? So we were able to trace all of that, right? And so we think like, oh, we're brilliant, right? And then so a few weeks later, it's Summit, so we have an annual user group, and sure enough, he's actually there, right? So the president of our company, who I was like talking this whole project up to, and he's kind of skeptical, actually goes up to him and like asks him like, so like tell me how you heard about Atlassian and all this stuff, right? And this guy actually confirmed everything we were saying. So in that sense, that was a pretty good like validation. As far as like the other question, like, or do we know if the way we're calculating, can we qualitatively like know if like the way we're calculating ROIs is right? I'm not sure if I know how to answer that. Like, people visit the website in a lot of different ways, and if you start thinking about your web activity, like you probably do a lot of things that you don't really realize, right? And so it becomes this very complicated, weird kind of way to kind of pull out of you like how did you actually find out about us, right? So yeah. Any other questions?
Do you have a way of determining a lifetime value of a customer then?
That's a very good question.
Did you try?
So the question is, do you have a way of determining the lifetime value of a customer? And the answer is, I don't. That kid wearing the plaid shirt in the back does. So you should all go ask him how he does that. Yes, in the back.
Earlier you mentioned about the attribution, the different methods. How do you give weight when you want either do the most recent or the last, the oldest touch? I mean, because some purchase may only have one, activity, can be one, but some can become 100 times.
Right. So the question is, how do we weight the things depending on how many times the people have come to the website? So I think if you've only come to the website once, first of all, it's not very likely that you're going to buy. But second of all, I think all the attribution models just give full weight to whatever that was. So yeah, that's how we would do it. Does that answer your question?
But like if something you showed them like 5 times,
right,
many like 7 times, how do you get weight point, so that you can do the weight attribution, the weight for each of those touch?
How do we calculate that?
Yes.
I think it's the position of the ad divided by the sum of the positions. So it's a very simple calculation. It adds up to 1.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I can probably write out a formula for you, and that might be more clear. No? OK. Go ahead.
So the data that's coming out of this, is this driving you primarily to, you talked about these broad categories of banner ads and AdWords and AdSense. Are you weighting those differently, or is it more fine-tuning the content of the particular ads in the category?
So we look at them separately. So we evaluate ads on AdWords differently than, like, we separate them out from display ads and other things. And we also deal one-to-one with like Stack Overflow, for example. So we look at that differently, and maybe like the guy who actually does all the negotiations and things could talk in more detail about how we do that. But we do look at individual ads and adjust the bids and things like that, because we can get at that granularity. Any other questions? All right, thank you.